The Star Trek Logbooks by Alan Dean Foster. This is episode 29.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casto, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
You know, when there was no new Trek in the mid-70s, we looked forward to new Star Trek books. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. This week, we discussed the Star Trek Log series of books by Alan Dean Foster. They were adaptations of the animated series episodes.
But before we start that little talk, let me tell you how you can find us. Just go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/70s Trek. And while you're on our page, we hope you'll leave us a question or a comment. You can also reach us by email at 70strek@gmail.com.
You can also find this show on iTunes. Just search 70s Trek in the podcast section. And please leave us a rating or a review. It'll help others find the show.
There were 3 series of Star Trek books in the 1970s. The first was the James Blish novelizations, and in the second half of the decade, there was also a series of news stories published by Bantam.
But it's the third series we want to discuss this week, the Star Trek Log series. It was a huge success for author Alan Dean Foster, but it might not have put him on the map, but it sure did make him more recognizable.
Absolutely. So let's start with who Alan Dean Foster was. He was a busy guy. He's not only was busy in the 70s, he's been busy throughout his career. Alan Dean was born in 1946 in New York City, and he graduated from Los Angeles City College in 1969 and published his first book in 1972. Kelly, what were you doing 3 years after you graduated? I wasn't publishing books.
No.
He's written more than 20 standalone novels and is known for writing the Human Acts Commonwealth novels. And there were over 33 books in that series.
I didn't realize there were that many.
There was a lot of them. Yeah. Foster also ghost wrote the novelization of the original Star Wars movie.
Wow.
That book is credited to George Lucas, of course, but Foster actually wrote it. In the book, he fleshed out a lot of backstory, a lot of different places and planets and races that the movie never touched on. A lot of history was in that book. And in fact, there was so much detail that it became canon for all of the later Star Wars books. That's amazing, isn't it?
That is.
So
I didn't know that.
Here's my favorite part of this story. He also wrote a sequel to that first Star Wars novel. In 1978, it was published, and it was called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Remember, 1978, this is before The Empire Strikes Back and before Revenge of the Jedi. So in this book, Luke and Leia have a romantic relationship.
I read the book when it came out. I forgot all about that romantic relationship they had.
How about that? So, of course, he had no idea where the series was going to go, but I've never read it. I'd like to now, knowing that he wrote it, because I like his writing. I would like to read that book now. In the mid-'70s, as Phase 2 was gearing up, he wrote the story, not the script, but he had the story idea and wrote the story for In Thy Image, which was to be used for the first 2-hour pilot for Star Trek Phase 2. So that was his story idea. He also wrote a number of made-for-audio stories that were released in the 70s that went straight to record. So if you remember those
Oh, yeah.
audio records. Well, of course they were audio. Those records that also had a book that, as kids you would read along with. Well, he wrote several of those. He also has a written by credit for Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And if you go and check him on imdb.com, you'll see he has appeared in many documentaries about the sci-fi genre. But of course, in our little universe, he's best known for writing a 10-volume series of novelizations based on the episodes of Star Trek: The Animated Series. They're known as the Star Trek Logbooks. And get this, he was just 28 years old when he started this project.
Oh, jeez.
That's crazy. So you're going to tell us a little bit about the books, right, Kelly?
Yeah, sure. Like you said, there were 10 Star Trek logbooks written between 74 and 78 by Ballantine Books. They originally sold for somewhere around $1.25 to $1.50. And obviously, they're the animated series, but of course, it's novelization. So he expanded them a little bit, added a little bit more detail or a little bit more story, if you will. Each book has 3 episodes. Now, it gets a little tricky because you get to log 6, and the publisher realizes, I only have 4 more episodes left. What do I do? I want to get to 10.
Oh, and they wanted to publish more books.
Right. So log 7, Foster began expanding these 22-minute scripts basically into full-length novels.
Oh my gosh! Can you imagine trying to do that 22 minutes, and you're trying to get what 130, 170 pages out of it?
Yeah, at least.
Oh my gosh!
At least. Now, he had to do this for the last 4, right? So,
oh my gosh!
So they spread that across the last 4 books, I believe, didn't he?
Yeah, in the series, right?
Yeah. So he would adapt these TV episodes in the first third of the book, and then write a completely new story in the last 2/3 of the book. And then he was tying all of these stories together at the end.
Wow.
Let's see. These books, they came after the animated series went off the air. So this, along with Blish's live action episode adaptations, Alan Dean Foster's logbooks, were critical in keeping the series alive.
Oh,
current, fresh, just out in fans' faces,
Do you remember them coming out? Yeah, I mean, you would look forward to them coming out. There was, during that period after the animated series, so there was really nothing to look forward to.
No.
And so the Blish books, and those were the later Blish books at the mid-70s point, would come out, but then these started popping up, and I can remember grabbing them off the library shelves. I'm like, oh yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, well, I remember. I mean, I didn't really remember the start of the Blish books, but I remember the start of the Foster books.
And how about the art on the cover of these?
Right, the original versions of logs 1 through 8 all featured scenes from the animated series.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, definitely. The logs 9 and 10, though, they had pictures of the Enterprise.
Still good, but I really liked seeing those images from the animated series.
No, I agree.
The one that really got me the most was log 1.
Yes.
And if you look at the image on log 1, it's from yesteryear, and it's Spock standing on the hillside, overlooking the Vulcan city. His home city. I think it's Shakar.
Shakar, yeah.
And it's kind of a haunting image.
It is.
Because
the colors even are kind of haunting.
They are, right. They're sort of browns and beiges. And if you know the story and you know what's about to happen in the story, then it does leave you with kind of this haunted feeling, like what's about to happen to Spock. He's about to go back and see himself.
Right.
We both read one story from a different log book, so we could kind of get a sense of what Foster was doing. For me personally, I had not read these since the 70s. So I kind of felt like I better read something. So I dove into Beyond the Farthest Star from Log 1. It's a really interesting episode. It's the one where the Enterprise finds the alien that is basically all energy, and it grabs onto the Enterprise, gets into the computer system, and they have to trick it to get it out again. And the episode ends with that sad alien saying, "Please don't leave me," which is just pitiful. It's just pitiful. I like Foster's writing style. Number one is the first thing I want to say. It is easy to follow. He does a very nice job. I've read some authors where you're not sure what the previous sentence just meant because it's so complex or because it takes some twists and turns. And, Foster's writing is very easy to follow. And so that helps a lot. The other thing I like that he does is he sets a scene really well. He took in Beyond the Farthest Star, he took 4 pages to set up the story of what Kirk is doing and thinking. And it's 4 pages of setup before the first scene. I should say before you see the first scene from the episode, if that makes sense.
Right.
So there's 4 pages of stuff going on that's brand new before you even get to the point where the episode starts. I guess that says it a little bit better.
Yes.
And I like it because he starts large. In Beyond the Farthest Star, he starts big. It's the galaxy. And he begins to, as he describes, what's being seen, he begins to narrow it in, and it ends up at a person, at a character. And if you think about how a movie works, typically a movie starts with a very wide shot and moves into the main character. And so in his books, he's kind of doing an analog of that. He's kind of taking you in to what the main character is doing. And I thought that was very creative. It's a really great way to set the stage. There are places in that story, and I don't know if it's because it's the first story, but there are times when he's not exactly true to the characters. The characters are saying or doing things that Kirk, Spock, Scotty, McCoy would never say or do. So that was a little bit of a head scratcher. Now, again, I part of it might be the limited. I was going to say part of it might be the limited amount of shows he had to look at. But what am I saying? He had 79 plus another 22.
Right.
So I guess I can't give him that. So that was a little surprising. But he does fill in a lot of blanks. I watched Beyond the Farthest Star, the episode, after reading the story. And I noticed that obviously the pacing of a 22-minute cartoon is going to be very quick, and it was. But what Foster did was, where an entire scene might take 30 seconds on the bridge in the cartoon, it went a lot longer because in between the lines that you saw in the cartoon, he added more dialogue. He fleshed out what was happening much, much more, which is cool. It's sort of like a hidden gem inside the story you already knew. Overall, I liked it. I enjoyed it. It was fun for me, first of all, because it was nostalgic, because sort of remembering these stories started to come back to me. But it was also fun to go back into these stories and see them again in a fresh new way. So you looked at More Troubles, More Tribbles, right?
Right, from Log 4. And this is adapted from the David Gerald script, right, for the animated series. Mm-hmm. I'll start off with, I like his writing too. It was real easy, and you hit on this a couple of times. He fills in blanks. So it's not, like you said, rushed, like the cartoon series. He's filling in some blanks. He's adding some very interesting detail about, just the inner workings of different things like For example, the Emergency Interstellar Relief Communication Sector, or they called it IRS. Well, I don't think they really got into that in the cartoon. They just got, hey, we got to go, deliver some grain to Sherman's planet. But not only does he add that little detail, which is kind of like giving you some insight into the Federation or the government or whatever, but also the gentleman that contacts Kirk, Macy, and this is the guy from the IRS, if you will, and Kirk is thinking, wow, this guy's got it rough. He's going from one disaster or one big issue to another. And, he's just got to be down all the time, basically. So, and he went on about this, not just a sentence or two, but a couple paragraphs.
Isn't that interesting? And again, it's a moment in a cartoon. It's 2 or 3 paragraphs, or in some cases, even 2 or 3 pages in the book.
Exactly. So I'm going to just go through some differences from the cartoon that I saw. And this is really goes back to the point of filling in those gaps. For the whole book, he tied it kind of together. So More Trouble, More Tribbles, he has several references back to the second story in the book. This was the third, which was the time trap.
Oh, so he was tying them together almost as if they were different chapters in the same story.
Right, exactly.
No
way. So when Macy is communicating to Kirk, he's asking, hey, how'd the mission go to the Delta Triangle? And if you remember Time Trap, the animated series, they go to the Delta Triangle and get zapped away into Space Pocket. And so Macy knew about the mission, brought it up, hey, how'd it go on, some small talk, but it kind of tied it together. Also, Scotty was down in the transporter room, and Kirk is assuming that it's somebody else, not Scotty. He's like, what are you doing down there? And Scotty's like, hey, I'm just trying to figure out how the Elysians were able to pick Kirk and McCoy out of the defensive screens. And so he's trying to figure out how to do that with the teleporters. And Kirk even goes, you haven't taken them apart yet, have you? Because we really need to use them. So I like that little touch. He even has little quips that he some banter back and forth that he adds. So Kirk is saying to Koloth, the Klingon captain, and he says, hey, I need to consult with my officers. Well, Koloth says something about, the archaic democratic principles you guys have.
Oh, I remember that. That's right.
The other thing I liked about this is the tribbles weren't pink. There wasn't a pink tribble in the lot. There was described as a straw-colored furball, a gigantic purple tribble, a hulking yellow tribble, and then a furry yellow wall.
So he gives them more colors than we saw in the cartoon.
Yes,
That's good. That's good.
Another piece of this that I kind of liked, and again, it wasn't speech, it was just kind of, a thought process. And when Kirk told Jones, Cerno Jones, he was under arrest, he goes, Jones was not enamored of Federation mind wipe techniques. Federation criminal psycho-engineers were especially dull lot.
Oh, my.
So,
that's
so
funny.
but I kind of like how they tied it into how does the Federation deal with criminals. Of course, towards the very end, Scott, and this was in the cartoon, so this isn't his writing, but I like to say this.
This is my favorite line from the animated series. Go ahead.
Tribbles on the ship, ? Quinto Triticale in the corridors and Klingons in the quadrant. Why, sir, it's enough to ruin your whole day.
Yeah, I love that.
You got to say it when we did the animated series, so I figured I'd throw it in here.
Oh, I'm glad you did. So you liked his writing?
Yeah, so it was very easy. And frankly, this story was fun to read.
Oh, good.
It was just, sit down and you go through it and it seems like minutes.
I know I'm jumping back, but can I read something real quick?
Sure.
This is from the beginning of Beyond the Farthest Star. And I'm not even going to read a lot, just a little bit to sort of show you how he sets the tone here. Veil of stars, veil of crystal. On the small view screen, the image of the Milky Way glittered like powdered sugar fused to black velvet. Here in the privacy of the captain's cabin on board the Enterprise, James T. Kirk had at fingertips' call all the computerized resources of an expanding, organized galactic federation in taped and microfilmed form. Holy cow! Think about everything that those couple of sentences were saying. Veil of stars, veil of crystal. I mean, he set the scene. We're talking about the Milky Way.
He literally painted a picture.
He painted a picture. Yeah.
Very
Very cool. Very cool writing. So clearly, Foster had a relationship with Roddenberry, with Star Trek through the 70s, even beyond just the logbooks. As we mentioned, he was involved in coming up with some stories for Phase 2, for even being involved writing or coming up with the story for Star Trek The Motion Picture. But then he kind of moves on to other things. In 2009, though, Alan Dean wrote the novelization for Star Trek, the 2009 movie. And then he did Star Trek Into Darkness as well. But that 2009 novelization was his first Trek work in more than 30 years. It seems kind of crazy for a guy that was so involved in Trek in the 70s that it would take that long for him to come back to it.
Yeah, amazing. But I'm glad he did.
Next week, we reevaluate what some consider as the worst Star Trek episode ever made. Join us as we take a look into Spock's brain.
I saw what you did there.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.